is, so but so 6:45, we'll come back.
Okay. Let me see what happened.
What? It should be
Oh,
fixed.
okay.
Whomever that was, can you text them to see if they're hearing at this point? Please, thank you very much. I have no way in which to know whether the outside world is hearing us or not, so we'll give that a moment.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for letting me know.
Oh, great. Okay, we'll resume the meeting.
See if I can get to where I was before. Yes. So basically what this individual said, what the department said, and actually Mr. Lewis from the director of the UC Agricultural and Natural Resources Management and Watershed Advisor concurred with this analysis, which is you won't be able to determine the contaminants that you're seeing in the water at the shoreline or nearby as specifically from the cows because of the water, the drainage down into that area comes from Ring Mountain and down through lots of residential development where you have both domestic and wild animals roaming. And so you have no way in which you can differentiate between them. So they didn't feel that the water testing would prove any type of issue for us in the area with just 4 cows. What Mr. Lewis and the Resources Water Management Board did state is it's more important in how you manage the cattle or the cows, the mini cows on the property, which is what we worked with Mr. Lewis and Mr. Crandall to devise a ranch management plan that he would feel would help mitigate any runoff. And that has to do with moving the animals through the dry and wet periods of time and making sure that they aren't roaming too close to the shoreline at the time that water is coming down in either rain or some type of other event. And then the evacuation plan, people were concerned, what happens to these cows when there's some type of catastrophe or fire or, who knows what. And I found this very interesting that most farmers, I did miss an A there in my thing, most farmers don't remove their animals from the area, but they have somebody go check up on them. However, Mr. Crandall did provide in the staff report various avenues in which to move them, but it's generally not the practice. And for four cows, it probably won't be the practice. So as you were talking, these are the pasture areas for the ranch management plan. And I'm going to try to, it's really not reading very well with the green, but let me see if I can point to stuff. So this is pasture 1, which is the fully fenced area adjacent to his home is somewhere in this area. And it was selected as a primary area for the cows and isolate them during the rainy season. It's the furthest place from the shoreline as well. And this is where the cows are supposed to be fed and sleep, and also establishing a compost in that area. They've created, in addition, there was a request, whoops, let me not do that. In addition, there was a request to create a buffer or a solution to create a buffer, vegetative buffer here for runoff as well. And for what that buffer would act at is kind of a purifier. Any kind of sediment or things that come through would settle within this vegetative barrier that would be adjacent to actually his home, between his home and the fenced property. Between October 1 and April 30th each year, the cows will be kept in this area unless you have 10 days of dry weather, in which case he would be allowed to put them in 4 and 3. And that is dependent on dry and wet. So pasture area 2, which is the one up here by the roadside, is also a fully fenced area. And it provides a secondary area for the cows. You do want to move them around between May and September 30th. They will be excluded from this area between October 1 and April 30th. And then pasture area 3, which is this area in here, is not currently fenced. The cows are allowed to graze in this area between May 1 and September 30th. And if there are 10 days in a row of dry weather between October 1 and April 30th, then the cows are allowed to graze in that area as well. And then finally, this is area 4. And that is currently not fenced as well. And the cows are allowed to graze in that area between May 1 and September 30th. And if there are 10 days of dry weather, they would be allowed to graze within that area between October 1 and April 30th. So that kind of gives you a feeling of how we're going to manage, or how Mr. Crandall's going to manage his cows in this area. So those were the 3 things that we did proceed to go forward, and we gave you the ranch management plan to look at as well. And finally, in order to determine whether or not you can have this conditional use permit, you have to consider a number of factors. And those are the findings that you found within your staff report as well. This has to do with the relationship and location of the proposed use to service or market area, or transportation, utilities, and other facilities required to serve this area. And the proposed keeping of the mini cows on a 10-acre piece of property on Paradise Drive is an appropriate location, since the cows provide vegetative management. The property is served by an existing and fully improved roadway and vehicular access, as well as adequate water and utilities to properly care for and maintain the 4 mini cows. And then we look at the compatibility of design, location, size, and how we operate. And the proposed keeping of the mini cows is in keeping with the use of the property. The property has historically been used in the past, not currently, but as a dairy farm. It is a large piece of property, very different than many properties in Tiburon, and distant from other residential areas. And the use is in keeping with a small family farm that will provide or allow for a self-sustaining lifestyle. And the mini cows will be limited to 4 cows on this lot. The probability of impairment to architectural integrity, there is no exterior changes related to this, so there's nothing there is no finding here. The protection of public interest, health, safety, convenience, or welfare of the town. The proposed keeping of the 4 cows will not generate any activities that result in the health or safety problems if they are managed in the way in which the ranch management plan has laid out, and the cows are taken care of in the manner that is prescribed. Then we don't believe there'll be any injury to the property or the area. Let's see, it's not moving down. And the need of the community for additional numbers of uses, paying attention to heed to whether the neighborhood or vicinity in the area is already adequately served by similar uses. This isn't really something we can make a finding for, because there are no similar uses found in Tiburon. And partly what I've been saying is that this 10-acre site is different, because we don't see these in most of Tiburon, and the ability to have large animals in most of the lots in town would probably not be so easily done. And then this has to do with the contribution of this use for economic vitality. And the keeping of these mini cows is not intended to serve others in the neighborhood or attract visitors to the site. The use is proposed for a family farm to supply milk and its byproducts. So it probably won't improve economic vitality on Paradise Drive or in the town as a whole. So what we're looking at tonight is a recommendation from the Planning Commission to approve the application and adopt the attached resolution, make changes to that resolution. We have some amendments to that resolution as well with respect to just format. We are changing our format, so we're open to other changes as well, of course. Partially approve the application by making revisions or adding the conditions as I stated, and direct us to return with the appropriate resolution for consideration of adoption at the next meeting. You can continue the hearing, of course, and request additional information, or you can deny the application and direct staff to return with the appropriate resolution for consideration of the denial at the next meeting. And with that, I'm available for any questions, and then, of course, there'll be the public portion of the hearing.
Terrific. Thank you so much for the PowerPoint presentation. That's always very helpful. I do have a few questions, but I'll turn to my fellow commissioners first to see if they have any questions for staff. Commissioner Woodward.
Yeah, Dina, you had focused the presentation on pasture one and being the distance from the neighbors, kind of the most distant. But there were 4 pastures, and you talked about having a vegetation buffer and a few other things around pasture one. So I'm just trying to understand how the whole plan holds together if there are 4 different pastures, in recognizing that there's time where they can be in each different one. So are we thinking about having vegetation buffers around all of them, or just trying to understand more how we kind of focused on pasture one only?
We focused on pasture one, excuse me, for the vegetable buffer, because that's where they're going to sleep. That's where they're going to eat. So I'm not an expert in cows, but I think that might be also where there is a lot of compost that gets taken care of. And so when water would run down, we wanted something that would actually, it acts as a natural filter by putting that buffer in there. So before it goes anywhere else, some of the more solid materials might end up there versus further down the hill. So it is a way in which to filter material as it comes through. The areas 3 and 4 are kind of open grazing that you can do not in the wet period to keep vegetation down and to provide enough food, but it's not where they will sleep or be for the larger portion of the day. So that's why the vegetative buffer was only for that area in which they're going to sleep and eat in.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Anything else?
No.
Commissioner DeFever. Oh, I actually have a follow-up question to that. That was similar to my question. Do you know the distance of just between the other pastures from the 588 feet is from pasture one? And do you happen to know the distance?
I don't know the other
closest pasture?
distances, and I think the reason why we concentrated on pasture number 1 is because that is where they will be for the
Right.
majority of the period of time.
Understood.
If I don't even want to guess what it
Right.
is because I don't
Right.
know. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, by the way. Thank you so much I know there's a lot of work to contact agencies and contact and talk to Mr. Lewis and, look at the management plan. And so thank you so much for doing those things that we had requested, because I know it's very time consuming. Did you, you determined probably through a lot of investigation that the water board was the appropriate agency to review the management plan with?
So Mr. Lewis actually told me that's how he would do it, and that's what he would do, which is to work with the board to figure out whether his management plan would actually eliminate the possibility of negative impacts. And what happens to the manure and how it goes down the hill, and he works with them. When I called them, they were very, they were not concerned with this. Or I said to them, we sent this to you, we asked for comment, asking you again. I have concerned residents and a commission that wants to know about effluent into the bay and whether the water quality would be degraded in any way for these 4 animals. She didn't really believe that that's the case, based on the management plan and how you would circulate it and where you would keep the animals, and the vegetative buffer was a must, and that you wouldn't be able to differentiate when you get a sample from the shoreline as to whether or not that was cow effluent or another one. So it wouldn't prove beneficial, even for a baseline.
So that was actually my next question was, in those conversations that you had, was there any expression of a concern beyond a discussion around water quality? It sounds like there was no expression of concern.
In reality, that group deals with large herds of animals, and not generally with the smaller farming doesn't usually come to their desk because it's not, something that has the same kinds of impact that heads of cattle do. Everybody brought up Point Reyes and the issues there. And she said, that's a very different, for lack of a better word, animal, because of the number of cattle and the number of horses and the number of elk and deer that are there. And how do you work with all of that? So this is sort of a small issue that could be mitigated to a large degree using management.
And there wasn't another person on staff who she was the right person to speak to just
Yeah,
broadly
it took
about
me a
that
long time to
request,
get to the right
to
person,
get to someone.
but Mr. Williams got me there.
Right, right.
Lewis, excuse me.
Mr.
not
Lewis, right.
Not related to you.
Okay, so
Okay.
that, so, and just one final question. Did you give any, was there any just thought, or do you have any thought around potential enforcement issues, how you might follow up and work with Mr. Crandall? Because this is so novel and you haven't seen it before, so you probably spent some time on how that might look.
I have spent some time with that, and I think we could set up something where, we do need to do a 3 months of reviews. I mean, we can't just wait until there's an issue. I think that it would be important for us to, maybe as a condition of approval, look at a schedule like that, and to somehow have both self-reporting on Mr. Crandall's side and me or someone from my staff being able to go there and make arrangements to be on the property or to arrive on the property, because people say if I make arrangements, they'll clear up everything before I get there, which I tend to have more trust in people than that. But still, we could do an enforcement type of process with this, being that this is such a different type of thing that you're doing or proposing to do. And we have to monitor it to some degree to make sure the grazing areas are proper and he's keeping everything clean and the way it's supposed to be, and that the vegetative buffers there are being maintained. So those would be things that
So-
we would look at.
So 3-month review, perhaps self-reporting.
I think we would have to do some
and-
quarterly reviews. I think
Yeah.
that would be an appropriate time period. I don't think a year time period makes sense. I think what we have to do is, right now he has 2. And, I haven't seen if the vegetative buffer's there. You could probably ask him that when he comes up to talk. And then, is it there? Does it meet the standard? Even invite Mr. Lewis back out for the first initial review. He's been very forthcoming and very open to helping us. I don't think I can rely on him all the time, but I think in the initial stages, it makes sense to do your initial review with him present.
Right. So that's that's 4, several good ideas, and
Yeah.
you have given a lot of thought to the enforcement. The one last, I remembered, I knew I had a question. I remembered it. Just, am I correct in assuming that the water board is the agency that looks and monitors water quality
Yes.
in the bay? Yeah. Those are all of my questions. Anything else? No. Okay. So why don't we open up the public hearing now? Or I'm sorry, we'll have a presentation by the applicant. If you could stand up and state your name for the record. And before we start the applicant presentation, I'm curious if we know how many people are online, just to get a sense of how many speakers we might have.
There are 10 attendees right now and 1 raised hand.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Crandall.
Yes,
Thank you
good
for coming.
evening. So my name is Eric Crandall and I live at 4576 Paradise Drive and I am the applicant. Good evening, Chair Williams and Commissioners. I'm happy to be here tonight and my family and I are looking forward to the process moving forward. Before I start talking about the cows, I did want to address some late mail I saw came in that was suggesting that the BCDC allegations are somehow related to this application. And so I did want to mention that the BCDC did issue notice of alleged violations based on complaints from the same neighbors who have been opposing this application that claim that I built a marina on the beach, created artificial drainage, and redirected water to the bay. You've all been to the property and seen the beach area. I provided you with copies of complaints and the notices that I received from BCDC. Over a year ago, my attorney contacted the BCDC in writing and requested an enforcement hearing so it could be determined if in fact there were any violations. You've been provided with a copy of that letter as well. The BCDC confirmed they received the request, but have not scheduled an enforcement hearing. And so the BCDC has not determined that there are any violations. So with that being said, we can talk about Holly and Mocha and our application to keep cows. Next slide, please. I know that you gave me this, but I'm pressing the button and all I hear is a down one. Okay. I'm a little slow. So we're applying to keep 4 mini cows on our 10-acre property. This use is allowed by the Tiburon Municipal Code with a use permit. 80 residents of the town of Tiburon sent letters regarding our application. 79 were in favor and only 1 was opposed. 108 people in the 94920 zip code wrote letters. 91 were in support, 17 opposed. 28 residents of Paradise Drive sent letters, all of which were in support, although I did see 1 in late mail that was opposed. And 33 residents of Paradise Cay submitted letters, 17 in support, 16 opposed. Multiple people wrote unsolicited letters to the editor of the Marin IJ and the ARC in support of our application. At our last meeting, as Dina mentioned, you'd requested some additional information, and we sought out an expert to ensure that we would not be polluting the bay. The Marin Resource Conservation District, the USDA, and the California Cattle Council all recommended the same person, David Lewis. Mr. Lewis is the director of the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension for Marin and Napa, the watershed management advisor for the North Bay, and the water strategic initiatives leader. Mr. Lewis has a master's in agricultural development and watershed science. His specialties are water and watershed management and research, and he is an expert on livestock, watershed protection and management, and pollution prevention. As watershed management advisor, Mr. Lewis develops and implements projects that integrate resource conservation with agricultural land use management. We did not compensate him for his assistance with our project. Mr. Lewis has been published dozens of times in peer-reviewed journals on topics such as reducing microbial contamination in storm runoff from pastures on California coastal dairies, linking on-farm dairy management practices to storm flow fecal coliform loading for California coastal watersheds, management scale assessment practices to mitigate cattle microbial water quality impairments of coastal waters, and California dairies protecting water quality. Our ranch management plan was created in collaboration with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis is an independent expert, not a paid consultant, and he wrote a letter endorsing our ranch management plan. Mr. Lewis is clearly an expert on the relevant issues, including water quality, runoff, and preventing pollution. And he works regularly with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, as Dina mentioned. The town forwarded our plan to the Regional Water Quality Control Board for review, and they had no issues with it. Our ranch management plan confirms for our family, the Planning Commission, and the community that our cows are not polluting the bay. Mr. Lewis did meet with a group of concerned neighbors in Paradise Cay, and we updated our ranch management plan based on feedback from that meeting. So we have a large property that was overgrown in a fire hazard, and we were visited by the fire marshal shortly after purchasing it. Goats had been suggested to us, but we chose mini cows instead because they were quieter, less likely to escape, and we preferred the idea of cow milk to goat milk. The cows have done an amazing job eating the poison oak and Scotch broom that previously occupied their areas. We look forward to moving our cows around the property so that we can keep it fire safe for our community. The Tiburon Fire Department wrote an email. As you may know, this is a huge property and the homeowner has been doing a tremendous amount of work clearing out vegetation over the last couple of years. All the neighbors closest to the cows have said they do not experience any issues with noise or smell from the cows. There are neighbors on Trinidad Drive who've said the same thing. You've all been to our property and were able to see and smell things for yourself. We've had the cows for nearly 2 years now, and there have been no noise ordinance violations for the cows or anything else with either the county or the town. We've made ongoing and consistent efforts to address various neighbors' concerns, including purchasing and using an electric chainsaw to keep noise down. We've not used the wood chipper that we own for over a year and instead spend tens of thousands of dollars hauling debris off our property. We agreed to text a neighbor before our family used the beach that is part of our property. We were willing to move bees to a different locations if the neighbors could agree on it. And we started turning off Christmas lights by 8 p.m. to try and address complaints. For a few of my neighbors, our family using our beach after no one had used it in many years was an unacceptable level of change. For some, our Christmas lights being visible through the trees or seeing our kayaks on our beach was just too much. For those neighbors in opposition to our application, having cows on our large property was not okay. One of these neighbors told the media that our getting cows was, quote, the stupidest thing in forever. It's clear the neighbors who don't like the way that our family is improving and using our property feel very strongly and are trying to find ways to stop us. This has led to allegations of trespassing, light pollution, and that we built a marina on our beach. They've also claimed that our cows create a nuisance. They blame the cutting of trees near the road for erosion on the beach and are now blaming our cows for that same erosion. They've said the cows shouldn't be allowed in a dense residential neighborhood, but more recently have said the area is rural. These neighbors have said they're just concerned with the health of the bay. However, they now don't want to accept the findings of the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the top expert in the area. The neighbors are against our keeping of cows. We're against you pre-zoning our property, are against issuing tree permits on our property, and are against my family using our beach. As one of them once wrote to us, they just want things to go back to the way they were. There is overwhelming support in the community for our application. Holly and Mocha are family pets who help keep our large property fire safe. An independent expert has endorsed the ranch management plan, as has the Regional Water Quality Control Board. All the closest neighbors and many in Paradise Cay support this application and do not experience any issues with noise or smell. As requested, an evacuation plan has been provided. The municipal code allows this use, and staff was able to make the necessary findings to recommend that you approve this conditional use permit. I hope you're able to make those findings as well. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. One question that comes to my mind is about the vegetation buffer.
Yes, so the way we designed that pasture, there is a vegetative buffer. It's actually directly behind our house. So we built in a vegetative buffer between our fence and the pasture, and then outside the gate as well. So yes, that is in place, and
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Commissioner DeFever.
I noted that two of the pastures during Dina's presentation and some of the materials don't have fencing. I know that that's common practice with cattle because often the topography provides the enclosure. Are they completely protected from wandering into the road? What's the situation on the unfenced portions next to the road?
Yep, great question. So our property is 99% fenced in general. Well, except on the bay side, right? Because we do have shoreline. So other than the shoreline, 99% of it is fenced. And yes, they are 100%. It's 100% fenced as far as them getting to the road. And probably if and when we start grazing them in those pastures, we'll probably use some sort of temporary fencing for rotational grazing. But we've been hesitant to move them too much given how this process has been playing out. So we've basically kept them in one place, wanting to get this resolved before we start doing anything different.
Okay, and so barring any actual concerns with whether they should or should not be allowed within 100 feet of the waterway, will you have a way to keep them away from the waterway if that's needed to be done?
Yeah, as I said, our intention is to use some type of temporary fencing when we start using pastures 3 and 4, so that we do have some control over where they are.
Okay.
I have a quick follow-up question to that, if I may. It was hard to tell from the graphic, which was a helpful graphic. I could see the pastures very clearly, but is it pasture 4? Well, pastures 3 and 4 are closest to Paradise Cay.
Yes.
And what is the distance? I think it's pasture 4 between your pasture boundary and your property line.
Gotcha.
Property boundary.
So I am willing to speculate, unlike Dina.
Yeah.
But just
you're
bear in
probably
mind, it's kind of
well
best
informed,
guess,
but
right?
yeah.
So it's probably about 100 feet to my property line. And then because that property line is actually in the bay, it's probably another 50 feet to the actual houses in Paradise Cay. So it's about 100 feet to the property line and probably about 150 feet to a house.
And was that your thought process when you created those pasture boundaries? What
Yeah, I
considerations?
mean, I was
were-
trying to keep them a reasonable distance away so that, you know, any potential complaints would be minimized, right? So neighbors aren't seeing them or, you know.
So it was sort of those neighborly concerns as opposed to fuel management or other.
Right, I mean, in a perfect world,
Topographic
we'd let them
concern.
go wherever, because then I wouldn't have to spend very much time mowing. But it is what it is.
And one question, what is the typical day of a mini cow? When do they wake up? When do they go out to pasture,
So-
graze, and when do they come home?
So again, we have not let them out of their fenced pastures, whichever one that they're in. We don't do rotational grazing currently in an effort again to not rock the boat, so to speak. So in general, their day like many pets, they do a lot of eating, a lot of sleeping, and a lot of you know,
But they do graze, they have
I
graze.
mean, that's the eating, right?
Right,
So-
right. So they're just throughout the day. If you were, if you were to, when you start to rotate them, if you do,
Yes.
and say you're rotating them from 1 to 4, but they sleep and they eat in 1. So
Yes.
what is the plan?
It
for
would
when-
be, and I, at one point in a previous presentation, I think I'd said something like 9 to 5 or, you know, nor.
I do remember, yeah.
Daytime hours, right? Like, I don't, something along those lines.
So they work during the day.
Basically, yes.
Thank you. Yes, continue.
Yeah, just one more question. So keeping in mind that we're not here to actually address the siltation that has now appeared in the waterway, because it has come up as a concomitant effect. Has there been any discussion with any of the neighbors around about what to do with the increased siltation?
There hasn't really been any communication about that at all. At least any productive communication, I should say. Early in the process, there were some attempts at it, but the responses I got were not looking for a productive resolution. It was.
Have any of the agencies that you have been in communication with made any comments about what the future of that siltation may be? Do they believe it'll increase? Do they believe it should be cleared? Has any kind of conversation?
So as far as agencies go, BCDC has been very quiet at the beginning. You know, they received complaints. They sent me letters based on those complaints. We provided additional information. They said this is contradictory to eyewitness reports. We said, fine, let's figure this out with the enforcement hearing. And then they backed off. And by backed off, they disappeared. So there's really been nothing there. I did have a civil engineer who's a certified stormwater prevention plan developer come out and review the situation. I mean, his take on it was this was a natural process. My advice is to not do anything because of basically the law of unintended consequences. You make this change and then you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the pictures that the neighbors have shared, the beach looks totally different today, right? I mean, I included a picture in one of my letters and I dated it, right? Just because that's relevant in when these pictures are taken. So I think it was from January maybe. And the channels that the big storms had cut into the beach are gone and the beach is smooth and flat. And I mean, by nature, shorelines are, they move, right? I mean, you've seen articles about Ocean Beach recently, probably.
So what does it look like well, let me back up. I did visit your property and it's been a while. It was before the previous meeting. At the time, I must have been there when the water line was high. It must have been close to high tide because there was a lot of water in between you and the residents of Paradise Cay. But correct me if I'm wrong, some of the photos make it look like when it's at low tide, you could even walk across and get to the neighbors in Paradise Cay.
It's mud. So yes, at low tide, that channel is empty of water, but it's mud, so walking across isn't necessarily a feasible thing, but there's no water, if that makes sense.
Okay. So ostensibly it could eventually completely fill.
I mean,
okay.
likely so that channel is artificially created. When before Paradise K was filled in, my property had 1,500 feet of open shoreline. When Paradise K was made, they blew up a hill, pushed all the dirt into the water, brought in fill, and so that channel is artificially created. So I don't know about hydrology and what comes in and what comes out. They dredge the channels within the Paradise K homes every 5 years to maintain them.
But they don't
Best of
dredge,
my knowledge, that
they
channel
don't
has
dredge
never been
that
dredged.
channel. Okay.
So my layperson's assumption, and this could be 100% wrong, is that channel's probably been slowly silting in since it was made in 1955 and probably has never been dredged.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. And I will restate what I just said at the beginning of my question, is that's not actually squarely in what we're considering today, but it is an effect that's possibly occurring due to all of the things that we're considering today. And we'll discuss it again later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you. So thanks for coming. Thanks. Great presentation. Appreciated you taking the time to share all of that. A lot of new information. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions back to the pastures, which is not my passion, but since I did visit, I think everyone was in pasture one at the time. So that's kind of where I have the most familiarity with that area. So just fully understanding, they go out to graze in pasture 2, pasture 3, pasture 4, whenever you start actually rotating pastures potentially. How do you get them back to pasture 1? It's just whistle and they come.
So two ways. One, like all animals, they're very food motivated. So if we fill up their feeder with food, they will typically head that direction. They're also harness trained. So just like a horse, you can put kind of a harness halter over their head and lead them. You can do that same thing with the cows.
Got it. So no issues. Every night they'd be back in pasture 1.
I mean, can I say, you have animals, right? I cannot guarantee there will never be an issue with something or something. I was talking to a neighbor who they had horses on Paradise Drive a while ago, and there was a story in the Ark when they were kids about one of the horses getting loose and being downtown. I would like to think that would never happen, but
Yeah, understood. And then obviously spending time in pasture 1, kind of the idea of a vegetation plan, is that fleshed out, like what that would look like, how comprehensive that would be or need to be?
you're talking about the vegetative buffer?
Yes.
Yes. So I did go over that with Mr. Lewis. We came up with a plan on that. And, I'll answer that question and also answer another one that was asked. The reason the vegetative buffer is only important in that pasture is because that's the pasture they're going to be in the rainy season. And that's when you're worried about runoff. So the reason the other pastures don't need a designated vegetative buffer is because they're not going to be there in the rainy season at all. So you're not worried about runoff in any way, shape, or form.
They will be potentially during, if 10 days of dry weather,
Which,
they could go.
but then it's not wet.
Right.
so you're
And
not worried
how
about
do
the
you
runoff.
plan to monitor that? Are you generally at the house and at your home or someone's at the home? What's the record keeping process for that?
So, I mean,
I lose track of the
no,
days after one day.
it's a great question. And actually, I'll answer another question that got answered about enforcement. When we were coming up with this plan, Dina did have concerns about enforcement, and Dina, myself, and David Lewis did work to come up with very black and white dates. So if a neighbor takes a picture of the cows in the pasture they're not supposed to be in on a day they're not supposed to be there, it's black and white, there's a violation, right? Like they're supposed to be here, the 10 days will be, I'll look at, it's like, oh, it hasn't rained in a while, right? I'll look at the weather.com, it didn't rain. Okay, we're good to go put them over here until it rains again. So that's my plan. I mean, by default, we're going to keep them out of those areas. And it's our responsibility if we put them in there to make sure that it hadn't rained in 10 days on weather.com. And then if something comes up, I'll be able to tell Dina, hey, Dina, look, I just checked, they're complaining that they're there, but it hasn't rained in 10 days. So it's okay.
And would you be willing to give the town staff permission to enter the property, or would you be comfortable with unscheduled visits? as
Dina
the-
can come visit the cows anytime
Anytime.
she'd like.
She can feed the cows, she can.
I know that's why she asked about the quarterly visits. She just wants to come spend time with Holly and Mocha. But yes, I'm fine with them coming by. And the other thing, you can see, you don't have to enter the property to see which pasture the cows are in. The two primary pastures are adjacent to Paradise Drive. So you can see them from the road, and the other two, if you just drove down the driveway, or looked from the road, you'd be able to see. So, and I have no doubt that there will be people watching.
My last question, and it's not specific to tonight's application, but I did see it come up in a number of letters around the development of the property. And specifically, it seemed to be that people were implying that you were pursuing that development. My understanding is that we, the town, requested you whether or not your property would be available to put up for that. Can you just clarify that for me? Because I definitely sensed a lot of in the questions. So.
Yes, that's correct. The only application I have into the town is this one. The rezoning, the housing element, that's something that's being undertaken by the town of Tiburon and not by myself.
So just another way to clarify, so you don't have a development application before the
I
town.
have
of
no
Tiburon?
development application. I have no rezoning application.
You've
I
just,
have no application in with planning other than this conditional use.
you've
permit.
just indicated that your site could potentially be available.
The town contacted me about it, and after some discussions, I told them I would be willing to allow them to change the density if they so chose.
Okay.
No good deed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions? So I think we've concluded our questions, and we
Thank you.
thank you so much. We can open the item up for public comment. And do we still have about 10 folks on the line? Because
We have 11 now
11,
and one
okay.
raised hand.
so I think we can give each speaker 3 minutes, typical 3 minutes to speak. We'll start with people here present with us today. If you want to just come to the podium and state your name, it's always hard being the first person, but we're here to listen. Anyone? Okay, yes. And just for the record, if you could just provide your name, and it would really be helpful to know where you live, if you live here in Tiburon, and what your address is.
Yeah.
Or
My name is
doesn't-
Robert Frick. Born and raised here in Tiburon. Well,
I'm going to start the clock too, so forgive me at 3 minutes, I'll just let you know.
okay. Yeah, Robert Frick. Grew up here at 5060 Paradise Drive, and actually back at that house, which is a waterfront property. And so I've spent my whole life in the bay doing water sports, windsurfing, kiteboarding, you name it. And it doesn't concern me at all, any sort of cow runoff. We have plenty of deer and whatnot. Everything, it's natural, in my opinion. It's not a concern. Cows are great. I have a little toddler now, and we love to go visit the cows. Known Eric pretty much my whole life. So I am in favor of the cows. I like them. That's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi there.
My name is Rick Schwach. I'm a practicing veterinarian for 49 years, and my concerns tonight are the issues that relate to your mission statement concerning the health, safety, and welfare of the Tiburon community. My family and I have lived in our current location at Trinidad Drive for 24 years. Our property line is connected to the beach of 4576 Paradise Drive. Since Crandall acquired the cattle It's appeared as he has failed to do the required job of waste management. The water in front of our home and several neighbors next to us now become the color of diluted cow manure, foamy manure, which is distinctly different from the normal green bay color of the water we've experienced for 24 years. This color and foam lasts from October to the end of the rainy season. As a doctor of veterinary medicine with extensive studies in microbiology and farm animals, I'm very well aware of the persistent levels of coliform bacteria likely to be found in this water, which drains from the Sierra Pines property directly into the bay. This bacteria includes high levels of E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria monocytogenes. These bacteria, when accidentally ingested by people, produce bloody diarrhea, meningitis, septicemia, and spontaneous abortion. All of those, especially the Listeria. We as neighbors met with David Lewis and Dina Tassini in February 23, next to this contaminated area to discuss our concerns about the loss of our swimmable water. When I asked David Lewis directly about the dangerous E. coli and other coliforms in this area that the cow manure creates, he stated water quality monitoring is not recommended, and any proposed water quality monitoring would require an effort that would be unreasonable in scale and intensity for Crandall to take on and to accomplish. This should not mean that Crandall should be allowed to have these cows and continue to contaminate our tidal waters without monitoring. We should be entitled to the clean, safe water that we've had to swim, kayak, and paddleboard. Our rights to enjoy the safe recreational water before Crandall brought these cows should absolutely be adhered to. So now Crandall wants to breed his 2 cows
You have about
because
30 seconds. I'm just giving you a time check, 30 more seconds or so.
So Crandall wants to breed his 2 cows because the cows get pregnant calves in order to produce the milk needed for his cheese and his butter project. With permission to have 4 cows, they will be producing 200 pounds of manure per day. So simple manure math, that's 35 tons of cow manure a year. Speaking with Dina at the meeting, no one in her office to enforce or monitor manure removal. She has no one in her office to help her. She said, I'm by myself. I have no enforcement committee to come and help you. And so I sincerely doubt with her busy schedule these days with H property that she's been out to monitor what's going on at the present time. So in conclusion, there must be accountability for Crandall, considering the possibility of toxic contaminants to our water. Therefore, it's important that this commission at least pause and seriously evaluate what impact your decision to allow any cows, let alone 2 more cows, on the health and safety welfare of the community. The hobby of one man should not be allowed to put the health and safety of so many at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a question for you. Yes.
Thank you, sir. To your knowledge, has anyone in Paradise Cay initiated a process to get the water tested?
I've taken water to my hospital and cultured it many times, and the growth of bacteria is overwhelming. But in terms of sending it off to like a professional coliform level, we have not done that.
Are you familiar, given what you just explained and what Mr. Lewis had indicated, how much more of a project it is to get it tested to that level?
Mr. Lewis is a great man. I like meeting him. He's a very nice man and he loves cows. And I love cows too. I'm a veterinarian. I don't mind cows. But his concern for the water contamination was not there. And he said that it was a very expensive, very extensive process. And I have a lot of rancher friends out in Nicasio that have 2,500 acres and cattle ranchers out there. It's a simple process. The process that was measuring the coliform levels at the Point Reyes project when it was cows versus the Thule elk, it's not that expensive of a test and they're available commercially. And so I would interject that it should be part of the monitoring of Crandall and his cleaning of these 32 tons of manure. I'm not sure how he's getting rid of it. I can't go into what they call compost because that's not compost. I mean, it's 32 tons of manure, and I've never seen a truck carry anything out of there. So there needs to be a monitoring, and I understand these positions of these fenced pastures. But when those cattle are allowed to roam, I mean, it's wide open. There's no stopping them coming up to the neighbors' back windows. I mean, I mean, I just, my property is not directly in view of the cows can't come up to the back of mine, but we are at the bottom of all those photos that you got of the silt and the manure. And from October to through the winter, it was brown foam. It was cow manure city. And now, I mean, perhaps repositioning behind in pasture one might be helpful, but I mean, there needs to be a monitoring system that David Lewis said was not possible, because it's very possible and it's very affordable and not that expensive.
Thank you for that extra information. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Question on the testing that you've done, just obviously it wasn't expert testing. Have you done that over time, or was that do you have a baseline?
No,
Is there any way to know the source of
No,
what you were
because in
finding?
order to have a baseline like that, you would need to submit a sample of the water to these professional coliform studies,
Yeah.
and then they would give you levels. I just wanted to see in my own hospital what kind of growth we're getting, and the growth on these petri dishes and things was just overwhelming within 24 hours. But I mean, that's not verification of what they are. I mean, it would need to be more of a professional study in a professional laboratory, which are available. I talked to my
Oops, we lost power in the.
That microphone is glitchy sometimes. Yeah. Let's see.
Do you want me to
Batteries?
hold on a second? Sorry about that.
1 second. Well, hold
Sir?
on, because they won't be able to
Can't
hear
if
you
it's not on-
online.
Yeah.
For people listening in and watching or listening.
No. Anyone have any batteries?
Excellent. There we go. All right, thanks for your patience, everyone, as we work to fix the microphone. Okay, so I think we do understand the answer to
Yeah,
Commissioner
the-
DeFever's question.
The baseline would be obtained with the more extensive test is what you were explaining to us.
with commercial test. I mean,
commercial.
they're available and they're affordable. I mean, it's not like it's out of the realm possibility. The one question I had is that there's a permit for 4 cows.
I think this isn't really the Q&A session. It really is a 3-minute comment period, and then the commissioners ask questions. So just to stick
Yep.
with the
I'm
pro-
going to
the
ask him
process.
one more question.
I can
though.
see the town attorney looking at me.
Just a point of clarification. I apologize for interrupting Commissioner DeFever. In other hearings that I've attended with this body, what we've done is collected, your questions. Typically,
Absolutely.
You keep track, we keep track. If there's issues that come up that members of the public raise, that
Right.
we keep track of those. Or if you have questions that arise during public testimony, you keep track of those, and then we kind of regroup, see if staff can answer them.
Exactly.
And if
And
necessary, reopen public comment, which is not something we do typically,
Right.
but it's, then it's fair to every public commenter that gets the same amount of time.
Right.
I completely understand. I'm asking questions that I believe only this gentleman can answer specifically from where he lives and his experience as a veterinarian. That's why I'm asking them now with all due respect. Thank
We've-
you.
we've done
Up
it
to the
so, yeah,
Commission,
yeah.
how you want to handle that. I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that you,
right.
adhere to our typical process.
We, having been on the commission for 8 years, we've done it many different ways over 8 years. So
We
I
have.
don't know that we personally feel that we have a typical process, but
Yeah, we have in five
but
years.
I appreciate that. So well,
I have-
thank you
I have
so
one
much.
more short question, actually, sorry. As a citizen of Paradise K, what is your impression of, I know you have a homeowners association. I'm understanding from what I'm hearing that there's an issue with that channel. Do you think that the homeowners association would be willing to pay for the testing of the water in order to ascertain what's going on in the channel?
I'll pay for it.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Next speaker. Yes, welcome.
My name is Julie Schwach. I'm Rick's wife. And as he mentioned, we live at 99 Trinidad Drive and have been there for 24 years. So I'd like to piggyback on what my husband just said about the manure runoff into the bay. This property has a really steep downward slope with culverts that run underneath Paradise Drive and onto his property, 4576. The faulty drainage system creates rivers that carry manure and contaminants that flow straight into the bay and our recreational waterway. Since we've lived here for so long, we've, seen a extremely rapid deterioration and erosion that's taken place since Mr. Crandall cut down a bunch of trees. So what happened when he did that was these rivers of water would flow down into the bay. And so, because we've lived there for 24 years, it's been dramatically different since, they've cut down all these trees. So I wanted to also mention that, when we did meet with Dina Tassini and David Lewis, we expressed our concerns about this drainage issue. And she did state that it was a big project for Public Works. So, whether it's a city project or a Crandall project, it needs to be fixed, this drainage issue, before any conditional use permit is granted. Because, it's our feeling that these drainage issues will continue to flow manure with the rainy season. And
Just a quick time check, about 1 minute.
okay, that's all I wanted to say. That's a bigger issue, is this drainage issue, and somehow it's got to be fixed before any kind of CUP isn't granted.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi. Would you mind stating your name? Yeah.
Yes, I certainly will. I wanted to thank you first for reconsidering this issue. And I'm going to read because I'm with, do my 3 minutes.
Understood.
Okay. So my name is Joy Graustark. I've lived in Paradise Cay for the past 36 and a half years, raised 3 children with my husband, Larry. And I've truly enjoyed living here and surrounded by nature, great blue herons that are nesting in the trees right now with 4 nesting birds. babies, owls that hoot at night, and all the other wildlife that visits. As to the issue of domestic cows on the hillside, I am concerned. I'm concerned about the drainage and the sewage that's been mentioned, and that'll most likely be created by grazing cows, whether it's 2, 4, or whatever. When I look at the map presented to the council, the grazing or the pasture areas 3 and 4 will create runoff onto my property and into the bay. Several new drainage ditches were created last year through grazing areas 3 and 4, probably due to all the tree clearing combined with the rain since the property was purchased by Sierra Pines and the Crandall family. So I'd like to know who's going to be accountable for the cleanup. Whose responsibility will it be to oversee the drainage from the hillside, the cow grazing areas, and the sewage created by changing the residential area into agricultural land use? That is, of course, if the permit gets approved, and as I understand, there isn't a permit in place now. So I'd like to add that I appreciate the Crandalls are trying to improve their property and make it into a farm. But my concern is that this is a residential area and it doesn't lend itself to agriculture onto the scale which they're considering. In my backyard, I grew fruit trees, vegetables, native and Mediterranean plants. I was also a docent at Stratton Arboretum, volunteer at Wild Care in the Bird Room, including careers in horticulture. I care about the land. I care about the earth and how we humans make an impact now and for future generations. So please, council members, do your due diligence, make a decision that protects the environment and all of the creatures that live here. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Hi.
Hi, I just, should I wait until you? can
Yes.
go?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Actually, if you don't mind, it's
Okay.
a little hard to multitask here. Yeah. Okay. Start.
Hi, commissioners, my name is Rachel Turner. I live at 111 Trinidad Drive and I've lived there for about 10 years. I'm speaking now to urge the commission to actually deny the application, not to grant the conditional use permit. As our attorney wrote to you in the record, what the balancing act is required is between like the harm to the community, the potential harm to the community versus the benefit. And I think we've argued pretty persuasively that the benefit to one family just shouldn't outweigh the potential risks, health, safety concerns of the entire community. And since I only have 3 minutes, I wanted to point to some specific evidence to you in the record. First, Miss Anna Davis's letter, an urban planner with a master's in city and regional planning and over 20 years of urban planning experience. She expressed a number of valid concerns of allowing cows to be kept in this residential community and states in her professional opinion, the CUP should not issue. I also wanted to refer to Mr. Davis's plan. We don't contest that he's like an expert in ranch management, but he expressly stated to us in our meeting with Dina present that he was expressing no opinion and was not qualified to express an opinion on whether a CUP should issue. He was not opining as to whether the property is appropriate for cows. I also wanted to touch on the subject as Dina very honestly has said, she's not an expert in cows. And I want to say, I don't think the town has either the expertise or the budget for running a cow management and enforcement project. And that should weigh into your consideration of the factors of should the entire community be required to pay for and expend the time and expense for this project that really only benefits one family. So I urge you to read our attorney's letters because she does go into detail as to why the specific factors that must be found for a conditional use permit aren't present here and the errors in the staff report that concluded that they were. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm going to, but I'm called to speak.
There.
I'm Wendy Shern. I'm a resident in Paradise Cay, neighbor of some of these people, and for 28 or so years, and since people are giving their personal
backgrounds, I'll say that I'm a retired physician and with an expertise in environmental medicine and occupational medicine. And I'm here to speak in support of the cows. Not, I don't eat cows. I must say, when I first saw those cows, I had a feeling of delight to see them unexpectedly in our neighborhood because they hadn't been there before. But I really think that the fears of some of my neighbors are really overblown. I mean, we had a lot of rain this year after many years of drought. And of course, there was runoff. There was a red tide, as I believe, in the winter. I swim in the bay. Well, I couldn't swim in the bay because it was not dirty from the cows, but it was dirty from I can't remember the name of the organism that was out there. I mean, Stinson had coliforms this winter because of all the runoff. So I don't think that's the true problem. I know that when people live under a hill, there's going to be runoff no matter what. And I understand their concern because they never realized that that lot of 10 acres was land that could be, lived on. It's hard to accept the change, but I really think that I'm impressed with the proposal that was worked out with the BCDC and the
water board.
the water board, in truth. And I'm comfortable with it. And I think we should allow Mr. Crandall to move forward with the plans he's trying to do to develop his land. And I am impressed with how he's developed that property, which was just, at his own admittance, kind of a mess with bees and poison oak when they moved in, and it's turning really beautiful. So I guess we're not doing questions and answers. And I guess that's all I'll say then for now. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
out. Yes.
I'm Patrick Nance and I live on Martinique Avenue in Paradise Cay.
Please be closer to the
yes.
microphone or they won't hear you online.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just set that. Patrick Nance, 203 Martinique in Paradise Cay. We moved to Paradise Cay in 97. I believe that was 26 years ago. And one of the first things I did was do a tour of the property in my kayak. And I've been in this thing which we're calling a channel. A channel, I believe, has flow and water, coming in both ends. This is not a channel. It's what in some parts of the country you would call a slough. It only has one opening, and it gets shallower and shallower as you go to the north until it's not there. And when I first saw it 26 years ago, it was impenetrable because of all of the brush and overgrowth with, small trees and bushes. Prime wildfire fuel. And I think the reason why this slough has become visible to some of our later Paradise Cay occupants is simply because Mr. Crandall has cleaned out a lot of that brush. And the same goes for the erosion. That erosion, I believe, was always there. It has a lot to do with the drainage of the entire east side of Ring Mountain, which comes down through his property. And so I think that erosion was also made visible by the clearing of the land. And it looked to me the last time I was walking down there that he's taken steps to control the erosion. And I think it's a positive thing for our community. And I know many of our other neighbors do. I think Mr. Crandall's been very forbearing in dealing with some of the hostility that he's faced from just a minority of the residents, just a few. So I'd like to say thank you for showing such maturity. I'd like to ask you, how
Oh, you know,
much do your mini cows weigh?
I think we,
Okay, well, I just consulted Google, and the cows that produce the what it was 26 tons or 32 tons that one of our previous speakers mentioned, those are at least twice as big as the ones that
and unfortunately, you're about kind of over the 3 minutes, so I'll let you kind of conclude with
okay,
the
well, I'll just
distinction
quickly
between the
quickly
statistics
conclude.
provided.
I have some knowledge of livestock. I was in Nebraska. I grew up in a rural area until I was 17. And the type of things that Mr. Lewis is usually dealing with have a cattle density of between 100 and 400 cattle per acre in various feedlots where effluent becomes an issue. And I'm sure when he heard 0.4 cows per acre, he thought, what's the big deal? And I would agree
understand.
with him.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Okay.
so-
Thank you.
Anybody else who's in the audience tonight? Yes.
Good evening. My name is Andy Ashcroft. I am actually not a resident of Tiburon, so I apologize for invading. I live in Belvedere, 1521. If we're doing credentials, I'm a family physician, a degree in public health. I understand that this is always a tough struggle, dealing neighbors with each coming to reasonable conclusions with neighbors when you have differences of opinions. I have to say, Eric is a friend of mine, so I'm biased, absolutely. I visited the farm. I think it's a beautiful thing that he's created there, frankly. If we're talking about joy to just one family, he's brought joy to my family too by allowing us to come visit there. I think it does something for our psyche to have something like that in our community, and it affects us in a positive way. I was kind of caught off guard by the ways that he has bent over backwards to try to satisfy the demands. I mean, having to text neighbors to go down to your own beach seems, I almost fell off my chair. I think what he's put forward to you is really reasonable, and he's put in so much effort to create a situation that should be acceptable, frankly. So I hope that you'll rule in his favor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. It looks like I don't see anyone who's physically present with us who wishes to speak. So we'll go now to those joining us online. And I'll ask the speakers, as we have been doing here to before providing 3 minutes of comment, to just state your name and give us a sense of where you live. And then I will record. I'll keep time.
So I'm going to promote or allow the speaker named Cynthia Marcy Kim to speak.
Okay. Hi, Cynthia. Well, I'm going to start the clock now for 3 minutes, and forgive me for being rude. I can't see you, so I will just let you know when the 3 minutes is up. So we'll start.
Thank you, planning commissioners, for your time this evening. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. If you can give me like a 30-second warning, I would greatly appreciate it.
I will do that.
Thank you so much. We are concerned about the current checks and balances that are in place, as we appreciated that David Lewis met with a group of concerned neighbors. This being part of the check system, he made it clear that he was not equipped to determine if the site was in fact suitable. His expertise was to verify that a proper managing plan was in place, such as rotating the cows, feeding, keeping them away from the drainages during wet weather. What is lacking is the balances portion of the system. A clear takeaway from the meeting was that Dina said she didn't have a proper enforcement staff on board. So I ask you how the town can grant a CUP without a post plan in place. Dina addresses this tonight by saying possibly a quarterly visits, 3-month checkups. Shouldn't there be something more concrete? From attending the development meetings, it looks like Dina and her staff are tasked by the council members to develop odds for the same property in question, which she estimated could take up to 6 months. How long will a proper enforcement plan take to ensure that the applicant is properly managing the waste? Every quarter may not be enough, especially if no one has committed to it officially. Has anyone checked on the property since David Lewis's visit, and especially after the applicant moved the cows to a different location? The applicant also stated in a letter refuting Ms. Breckus, the lawyer representing a small group of neighbors, that any manure that did happen to make it into the drainage ways would not be a violation of the codes. I asked the Town Planning Commission, how is this not a violation? We express our frustration about the timing of this meeting during a very crucial point in the town's housing element process, which I believe expands beyond a small group of neighbors on Trinidad, which leads me to my next question for clarification. The lot is currently zoned as RPD, which conforms with low density land use, open space, etc. As we all know, the rezoning of this property was deferred to January of next year for R3-10, which allows for high density. And this has nothing to do with whether or not the applicant had submitted an application for development. This is a question about zoning. How do the cows fit into this equation if, especially, this property gets rezoned? When an application to develop is submitted before or after, it seems unreasonable to allow 2 cows, let alone 2
Give you your
more.
30-second warning.
Thank you. It seems unreasonable to allow 2 cows, let alone 2 more cows. How can cows cohabitat while developing potentially for 93 units? The applicant should not be allowed the best of both worlds. He's been allowed cows on the site for almost 2 years now without permits. And we have heard from a Paradise Cay resident directly, his ultimate goal is to develop and make money. And as I said, the timing of this meeting seems very inappropriate, especially since we do not know what will happen in the next 6 to 7 months.
Sure.
I am not sure if the Planning Commission will allow this, but we do have a photo of Paradise Cay between the properties from 1970s where the inlet shows plenty of water.
So we're now over time, so I'll ask you to conclude your comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is it possible for us
Yeah.
to see a photo? She's trying to.
So the next.
Sorry, I'm a little bit slow today. So the next speaker is raising hand is Suzanne Kim.
Suzanne Kim. Okay. Welcome, Suzanne. I'll start the timer.
Thank you. My name is Suzanne Kim. I live on 20 Mateo Drive, adjacent to the site. I have to say that I am in support of a conditional use permit. First, I'd like to state that I am a member of the Design Review Board, so we've actually seen a form of this. What I am concerned about is the scientific notion that correlation does not equal causation. Just because you see the cows there does not mean that there is an increased pollution created by the cows. So correlation does not equal causation. That is a fundamental rule of science. I am concerned that there's a lot of armchair scientists out there, pseudoscientists, who are alleging certain things. I defer to the agencies who do have regulatory control over this to oversee Mr. Crandall's and the Crandall's property to make sure that they are in conformance with what they are required to do under the BCDC, and I think I'm not sure if it's the CCC who's also involved. Sorry to call the Coastal Commission, but regardless, this is not for the benefit of the, to say that this is just benefiting one family is not true. I have to say that my children are in his children's classes, and it is an amazing, amazing benefit to the learning experience of the children and also the neighbors. the incredible things that they have done in terms of mitigating the wildfire potential by removing these, pyrophilic trees has been substantial. And I have to say that it was an eyesore when I moved in over 10 years ago, and it's just nice and so refreshing to be able to see the water for the first time when you're driving along Paradise or bicycling along Paradise or walking to the K from my neighborhood. It's just been so delightful. And I have to say, I love the Christmas lights that go around there. It just, that area, it's so hard to drive around, and having that there has actually been fabulous to for the curve as you're driving around. It's been a great marker for that curve. So I urge you to really consider that the regulatory the concerns about, the lack of regulation. There is plenty of regulation that's
20
actually
seconds left or so.
and so just to voice that, like, I would defer to the regulatory agencies that are in place to oversee this, and I have no problems with the Planning Commission issuing a conditional use permit for these for small cows. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't notice. Yeah. So
So the next speaker who raised hand is James Marcy.
Hi, commissioners. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Cynthia's husband. We moved into 103 Trinidad in 2019. In 2021, because of the erosion, we commissioned a civil engineer to do a topography survey along the beach. And on average, a beach erosion is about 0.1 inches. The civil engineer noted that it was over a foot, and that was in 2021. No, 2022 was a massive rainstorm. So just by visual, the mean high tide from when we resided in from 2020, it's moved up about 2 feet. If you continue that progress, I mean, the erosion is just going to basically clog up that channel over time. Now, my problem is, clearing the trees, fine, great. That's awesome. But you should have a mitigation plan in place. Like, bring some rocks in there to stop the flow of water down. Nothing has been done. No one's told them to do anything. And Mr. Crandall's is the type where, if he's not told to do something, he's not going to do it. So David Lewis told him that he should probably move the cows away from the culverts. And upon him saying that, then he moved the cows. And to the point, Mr. Crandall, he hasn't reached out to any of the neighbors in 2 years. And that's all I would like to say.
I missed your last sentence. I couldn't
Mr. Crandall made a point that, he tried to reach out to the neighbors, make peace, etc. He hasn't reached out to anyone in 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So the next speaker who raised hand is Ken Hung.
What, the name again?
I may not pronounce
Okay.
it correctly. But it's spelled
Ken.
Hung.
Okay.
Huang.
Thank you. Hi, Ken.
Yes, hi. I'll be brief. My name is Ken Huang. I'm a resident of Paradise K. I lived here with my 2 boys since 2003. I am very concerned with the applicant's request to raise 4 cows. The property is very sloped and is very close and already contaminated San Francisco Bay. It is not suitable for livestock. Relying on one expert is not sufficient. What is the harm with having more experts to review the usage? The San Francisco Bay. I also have serious concerns of the applicant's intentions and integrity. Why is Tiburon considering his request given existing violations? I'd like to know if Sierra Pines and Crandall family wants actually a dairy farm to make cheese for his family, or to allow to build high density units. Please carefully review the applicants and the environment before making any approval. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The next speaker is Constant Connie Hellman.
Hi there, welcome. I'll start the timer. If you could state your name.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I just ran in from another call. My name is Constance Heldman. I'm a realtor. I live in Paradise Cay, and I'm also one of the area specialists for Paradise Cay, selling over 65 homes in that area in the last 20 plus years. This is probably not the time for questions, but I would ask the board to please consider what this type of a move is going to make and is already making on the value of the people's properties in Paradise Cay. Personally, over the last couple of months, with all the advertisement that's been going on about this unit in the paper and so forth, I've had agents and buyers call me and say they're interested in Paradise Cay, but they don't want to be anywhere near where the conflict is with the cows and also with the development that is also being proposed down the road. It brings to mind a comment that was made earlier that should the one person's want affect so many people and their property values, which of course we all know how important it is to keep your property values up for retirement and so forth. So I don't know if that has been considered by this committee. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask that question, but I would encourage you to please look at that. And if you need some information on polling and how we think it is affecting the property values within Paradise Cay and those surrounding properties, I'd be happy to help.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Catherine and Stephen Hendricks.
Hi there, welcome. Oh, give me one moment just to reset my timer here. Are you there?
I asked to unmute, so can you please unmute yourself? Thank you.
Hello,
Hi,
this is Stephen. Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful.
What is your name?
Stephen Hendricks.
Hi.
Hi, so we live directly across the street at 4575 from Paradise Cow Farm, and we love the cows. We're behind them 100%. There's no smell, no sound. They're just wonderful. In regards to the erosion, we're the ones that cut the trees down for our view, and we left all the stumps, which are at least 3 foot high. So the amount of rain and stuff that's happened in the last 5 years has changed our topography down to theirs, and it's inevitable. And we just want to say, it's kind of ridiculous, everything Eric's going through in regards to being at the bottom of the hill. That's pretty much all we need to say. We love the cows, we love the Crandalls, and we're just sorry that what they're going through, because it's been rough with the neighbors. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have another speaker. His name is Scott Beauchamp.
Scott Beauchamp, I think. Scott, are you on the phone?
I am, thank you. Yes, it's pronounced Beecham. It was close, thank you.
Oh.
Excuse me.
Not a problem.
Thank you for correcting both of us. Okay, yes, feel free to begin.
Thank you. So I had a couple of questions. One of them is in reference to the breeding of the cows. So the understanding is the permit is for 4 cows, but the intent is to breed them. So what happens to the additional cows that get bred, and are those going to be removed from the property to maintain the 4 cow max permit?
I think and it'd be helpful just to provide your comment. You can weave in questions that the applicant does have an opportunity to rebut. So, some questions can be addressed.
So
But
that
it's just an opportunity to provide comment.
Okay, so I'm sorry, no questions. And just in reference to Mr. Hendricks, hi, Stephen. So Eric is downhill from you, but we're downhill from them. So from Eric. So we do get the end of the runoff from whatever happens from the Hendricks property through the Crandall property. So that's, I think, our biggest concern is that the amount of runoff and erosion that's occurred since we've moved in 2012 at 107 Trinidad has been monumental in the past 2 years over the last 10. And that is the primary concern. And so whether it's the excessive rain that's happened in the last year, we've had excessive rain in the past, but there is quite amount of erosion runoff. And we have photos to demonstrate that. And actually, some of the members in the audience do have some photos of previous from back in the 70s showing the channel and the lack of erosion. If the commission is eager to see them, they can show those to you in present there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I did not see any raised hand, but I would like to give an opportunity for people who would like to speak and raise their hand at this point.
Yes, very
And-
good.
And
So
I will
we'll
give them
allow,
5 seconds.
yeah, maybe 30 seconds or so
okay.
to raise your hand if you are online and you wish to speak. This is your opportunity to do so. So we just want to make sure everyone has a chance to comment. And it's also, I should note that we have received numerous letters, letter submissions and emails, and we have read all of those submissions. So and we've heard many of what we're hearing this evening has also been presented to us.
So I see another raised hand, but is a speaker that who already
Okay,
speak?
so we're one opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. We can close the public comment period. I give the applicant, I believe it's 5 minutes. Typically has. I think it's 5 minutes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Close to that, I think, unless you have questions. So just to answer Mr. Beecham's question, the permit's for 4 cows max. So the idea is we have 2, they'll be bred, there'll be 4. If we wanted to breed any more, we'd have to get rid of 2, which is probably the cycle that would happen to keep milk coming, is to sell off the babies as after they're weaned. So 4 cows max is what we're asking for. As far as the runoff, which I know has been brought up, as people have mentioned, I mean, again, I don't know how relevant this is to the cows because the cows didn't cause the runoff. They didn't cause any erosion. They didn't cause any of this. But I'll address it anyways briefly. When we have these massive storms, there's tons of water coming from everywhere, and every winter, the color of the water changes after big storms because dirty water and dirt is running into the bay. So I am not a water quality expert, but I did grow up here, grew up on the bay, and bay, ocean, whatever, you see the color of the water change after storms. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I think those were the 2 things I wanted to touch on.
Just one clarification point that you just made about selling the cows. And I do see in the conditions for approval is not advertising or selling on site. So just assuming that means selling off site
Well, I mean, the cows will be on site, but we're not going to have an auction or, anything along those
I had noticed that
lines.
condition of approval and just
Yeah.
hearing you talk about selling the cows made me.
Yeah,
go,
it's not being.
I
done
don't
as-
know how cows are bought and sold.
Yeah, exactly. Facebook Marketplace, I think.
Well, that's how they're valued. That's a different question. Okay, and no, I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll return to the commission for deliberation. Commissioner DeFever actually grew up in the Midwest and is very familiar with cows. So not to put you on the spot, Commissioner DeFever, but I am always interested in your insight on this particular issue.
Well, it's a catch-22 because I grew up with a lot of cows on both sides, but I also grew up in a very different environment than Tiburon. So while it can be instructive, it also can be inapplicable, which I appreciate about my knowledge set. Well, I'll start with the first thing that is instructive. I do know from living in a house with cattle on both sides, is that they're not noisy very often, hardly at all. In fact, I mean, we saw through the documentation that we've received that, people do hear them, but cows are really quiet. They're just as animals in general, they're very, very quiet. They might be noisy if they've been, I'm sure when Mr. Crandall brought them in, they were noisy at first, because they were removed from wherever they lived before and they were upset about it. They're a herd animal. They probably had other cows around them. It doesn't take them very long to settle in, maybe a week at the most. And they might be noisy if Eric Crandall forgets to feed them, for example. So if he's not a very good cow steward, I think the whole neighborhood might know about it because they weren't fed one evening. But otherwise, they're not loud. They're not going to be a consistent nuisance to the neighborhood. Also smells. You know, 2 cows just are not going to have much impact on what you smell. Having had 2 herds on each side of my house, we hardly noticed at all. When you noticed is maybe when it rained for several days in a row, or maybe when it was really, really hot and everything was baking for several hours. But that's really unusual. And even so, it's not a noxious odor. It's not harmful to anyone. And I can't imagine noticing 2 cows. I can't even imagine noticing it from Mr. Crandall's house because it's just not a lot of manure at all. So that's probably the extent of my cow expertise that is useful, because otherwise this is a different environment, which is what makes this such an interesting and difficult to balance application. Really quickly, I have some notes here. I mean, this is voluminous. You can see from our desk, we've got a lot of letters. I appreciate all of the comments that we've received and the research that's been done by staff and all of the consultants who are not in the room with us, but a lot of people have been involved in this process. A lot of very intelligent, articulate people. So I do have notes here. I wanted to note that there's there are a lot of catch-22s in this situation. The land needs to be cleared to prevent fires, to prevent the increased fire risk, which we do have on this peninsula. And I know a lot about because I'm a plaintiff's insurance attorney, and I help people who've lost their homes to fires. We do not want to lose our homes to fires. We need to do that clearing. We absolutely need to do it. If you don't do it, the state of California will burn on its own. That's what it had traditionally done before humans lived here for so long. And then what happens, you've probably all driven through Sonoma or other areas that are nearby, you'll get erosion anyway because everything burned rather than having it being cleared. So I think erosion is going to happen whether trees are being cleared or whether they've been cleared for us by a fire. Erosion is going to happen. So it's one of those situations where it's difficult to balance when and where and how. I really have empathy for the neighbors who are concerned about the loss of the water that they'd like to swim in. I mean, these houses are expensive on the Tiburon Peninsula, and whether it's a founded concern or not, the fact that they don't believe they'd like to swim in that water is not okay. They should have the ability to swim in that water if they want to. And I would encourage testing to be done to check that everything is okay. Now, my instinct on it, having, like Commissioner Williams indicates, having experience with a lot of farm animals in my own childhood, I don't believe that 2 cows would have any impact on that strip of water, particularly because it's connected to a much larger body of water, the bay. I doubt that is something that needs to be a concern, but I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert, and I want people to be comfortable with the water that's next to their homes. The concerns about Tiburon and enforcement. It is true that we do not have enforcement officers in the town of Tiburon. I think that's unfortunate, but it is not my affair as a planning commissioner to decide that, and it's not in front of us tonight. We do our best with what we have. We do follow up when we say that we follow up. And if we decide here tonight to have follow-ups occur, they will occur. And then I wanted to make a comment about what might be kind of the overarching theme in the room. And we've heard it from some of our comments tonight. It's kind of, if you're looking at whether or not you have cows on this property or whether or not you have a high density housing project on this property, it's kind of the elephant in the room, if you may. You know, everything's a balancing act. Will the cows cause changes in the environment? Yes, they will. But let's think about what kinds of changes they cause in the environment, because a high density housing project will also cause a lot of changes in the environment. And I would encourage the people of Paradise Cay, the people of the county living adjacent to this parcel, and the people of Tiburon to consider this carefully, because probably you will receive one or the other. And yes, change is inevitable. And I mean, I don't want to tell anyone what their preferences are, but with, as the planning commissioners, my fellow planning commissioners well know, we have been placed in a very uncomfortable situation that we need to approve these high density housing units. I don't believe they're appropriate based on current Tiburon principles. The state is forcing us to allow this type of high density housing. I don't think it's good for the environment. But if you put it next to the approval of possibly 4 cows and what their impact is on the environment, those are quite very different situations. So I just would like to frame that for the people of the peninsula to think about, because we cannot, the short, easy way to phrase this is we cannot stop the high density housing. The state won't allow us to. So I now cede to my fellow commissioners.
Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you. Well said, Commissioner DeFever. If not for this voluminous amount of material, I would just cede over to the chair, but unfortunately I have a slew of questions. So maybe Dina, I think many of these may be addressed to you. If I could just try to get some clarification.
I will try my best.
Great. So a question, were there any issues brought forth to the town prior to around the 2 cows, around Holly and Mocha, if I recall their names, before this application for the cup?
So
I'm trying to understand if there was a history of complaints from neighbors and challenges and issues brought forth, or if the cup.
So there's been a change, right? So Mr. Crandall originally was in the county. He annexed to the town right when I came on. So the cows were already there. There were bees, there were trees being cut. There were a lot of changes happening. So I believe that the community adjacent to Mr. Crandall had concern about these things. And it was brought to my attention for the bees first. The cows were then became more of a focus when the conditional use permit, when we let Mr. Crandall know that he's going to need a use permit to be in the town with those cows. And the county did not give him the use permit when he originally applied, because they had different standards, different rules about it. And so, and you know, I think there's been on and off kind of discourse between the Paradise Cay and Mr. Crandall for things like taking down trees, and then there were tree permits. There were tree permits, but there was quite a discussion about that. And then was the cows and the bees, and I did not get involved in any of the BCDC because that's not my jurisdiction. So that's pretty much where we are.
So did the conditional use permit request come about to cover the 2 cows that exist, or only for the additional 2 cows? So maybe said another way, if this conditional use permit is not approved, then do the existing 2 cows also have to go?
That is correct. So originally it was for the 2 cows. And after some discussion with Mr. Crandall, he wished to change that for 4 in order to allow for the breeding so that milk could be made, because, you know, it doesn't happen without having babies.
Okay, thank you. And then there were a number of comments kind of suggesting that all of the, I think what Mr. Crandall would characterize as upgrades to the property, maybe what others would characterize as, you know, a lot clearing almost to the property had taken place. But are there any situations where we, the town, would put, kind of stipulations on an owner's ability to not upgrade their property, other than, of course, getting the correct permits for cutting of trees?
So as long as it's either a permitted or conditional use within a property, we can't preclude a person from applying for the permit. It is not guaranteed that person receives the approval, but they can certainly come in. Could he put a factory there? No, because it's a residential area. So it's sort of those are, I mean, I'm using a pretty broad example, but in general, if somebody comes in and it's allowed within a residential use, either allowed or conditionally allowed, a permit is applied for. So with trees, permits are applied for. I know that he worked with his adjacent neighbor for some of the tree removals to allow for view, which is something we love to see, that neighbors can mediate between one another and remove trees for sight lines. So.
Great. Thank you. And then I believe it was Ms. Schwach, and apologies if I got the name incorrect, but referenced the drainage issue on the Crandall property and had suggested that it was a town or public works issue. Can you?
So I think what that put it a little more into context, in order for the drainage from Ring Mountain and all of the other subdivisions that come down, we would have to improve and upgrade the systems throughout. Let's not forget that Paradise Drive both has a county component and a city component. And so upgrading that infrastructure has to be a joint kind of deal. And plus it has to be budgeted. It's quite a huge piece. So that's why I said it's a public works kind of capital improvement project that would have to take place. We wouldn't necessarily initiate that. Not saying that we wouldn't,
Right.
but it's not in our capital improvement program to date.
Yeah, I didn't recall seeing it on the last meeting.
It isn't because, and I think it has to do with kind of, we are dealing with cross jurisdictions there.
Okay, thank you. And then you answered that one already for me. And then we talked, there were some discussions around the violations in the BCDC, and I'd heard kind of two differing, what I thought were two different viewpoints. Are there actual violations outstanding on the property today?
So I have talked to BCDC on several occasions. I really don't understand why they haven't moved on anything. So there is currently a case that Mr. Crandall has asked for administrative hearing that hasn't occurred. I look at these a little bit separately because that has to do with BCDC and their jurisdiction with respect to a boat storage type of facility there, or storing some kayaks and boats on that property within the shoreline, which is not something we look at it doesn't preclude us from doing other permits.
Thank you. And then there were numerous comments about the kind of the weight of benefit versus harm, and the one versus the many, or the one family in this case versus many families. And I think there were many families on both sides, but is there any sort of formula? It's hard to think about, the Crandalls may be one family, but they have 10 acres. And we've seen, the potential to zone that for 93 units. So do we count that as 93 votes? Do we count it as one vote? Is there any sort of precedent on how we think about that in context?
So I'm trying to understand the question. So let me see if I can ask it back, and then you can say whether I'm on, because I'm a little wondering where you're going with this. But one of the challenges that we have when we look at use permits is to balance and to see what would those impacts be. So it's not just a permit by right. Like you just don't come in and say, in this residential area, I want to put a cow. No, you're going to have to go through this process to see whether or not we can evaluate those impacts. And so that's kind of your balancing act. Do you believe that what we've provided to you with respect to information is enough for you to figure out whether you can support, deny, or in some ways add conditions or however you want to do it, to look at this permit. So I think that's what you're asking me. I can't help you with a precedent with balancing.
Yeah.
That's what you get to
Yeah.
do creatively. I get to be a technician. You get to decide whether we have given you information. So I hope that, I think that's what you were asking, were you not?
Yeah, I would feel very differently if Mr. Crandall were applying for this permit and he lived in the middle of Paradise K. And in that 10 acres, there were 100 homes around him versus the 10 acres next door. So I was just trying to think about how, but I understand it's art versus science. So I was looking for science from you.
It is an art versus science.
Okay. And then. Oh, on the, we heard a number of comments around, the conditional use permit enforcement, and Commissioner DeFever referenced it as well. And, suggested that we don't have an enforcement department, we don't have enforcement officers. But I do, in my limited experience, I have not had the 8 years that Chair Williams has had on this commission. But in my experience, we sort of rely heavily on the 8,000 plus citizens of the town of Tiburon as our enforcement department. It strikes me that in this particular case, there are hundreds of kind of nearby citizens who will, I'm sure, report back to us on whether or not this enforcement happens, but or whether or not the compliance, with the conditional use permit were to happen. When that does happen, and then your office is called, what is the procedure? How quickly do you seek to address or remedy, and recognizing you're balancing a lot of things?
So we do operate our code enforcement based on complaints. We do not have a staff that goes out to find illegal work being done, all kinds of other, I could list them, but that'd be a long time. And so we do definitely respond to those things. In the instance of something like this, where there was a conditional use permit, where you stipulated within the conditional use permit that we had to do these, we would be even more likely to respond very quickly. I can't say that we have dedicated staff to code enforcement. We don't, but we do dedicate staff when we have to do these inspections along the way. And when we have people who call us and say, this is a problem, we send someone out within that 24-hour period for sure. And most of what we see is not necessarily, we see for music that's past hours. So the police usually are involved with that. And then we have to follow up with letters and meetings with the property owners. And we see building without permits. That's probably our biggest code enforcement piece. So in answer to your question, we may not have a division, but we do go and do code enforcement. And we do have processes where we send letters and citations. And if it gets to that point, there are fees that or fines, not fees, fines that are put onto the property. So we do it. I would say that we don't have a dedicated person for it, but we manage to get those done.
A 24-hour response time is admirable.
We try, and I will say that there's a triage to it as well. So.
Okay. And then my last question, before I turn it over, if this cup is approved, would the zoning request by the town be rescinded or changed in any way? And or do we believe that it would be seen differently by the state?
I mean, you want to take a stab at that one? I think I have a good
we
answer.
probably
but-
have the same answer, which
Go ahead. Let's see.
no.
It doesn't change anything.
It really doesn't. They're two different planning actions, the land use designation versus the specific project you have in front of you tonight.
But in your expert opinion, if I may, you don't see this as this is approved. Now it's, kind of this rural farm area. And does the state now look at that and question, well, then what's the likelihood that really this guy's going to go and then develop 90 units on top of it?
So, one of the criteria we do have to provide, as you know, through going through the housing element, when you have sites on your sites inventory, is its really development potential, if you will, or likelihood that it will develop. I do not believe, and I will ask Ms. Tasani to weigh in as well, since I jumped in here, that this would change that analysis from HCD's perspective, but it's a use permit versus a larger development type of permit that may be looked at differently if someone had invested a large amount of money very recently in developing, a building on the property. That might be looked at differently.
And I would piggyback on that and say, I do not believe that this will impact that. They're separate permit authorities really, or permitting actions. And I guess to just be kind of a little bit, if a development came in, which we don't have currently, if another development came in, Mr. Crandall might have to move his cows out. And cows are movable. They go somewhere else to graze. It's not like having a huge development there that you're approving to do whatever, and then they're going to knock it down. I think that might create more barriers. I don't believe they'll look at that in the negative.
Thank you. And that may actually feed into one last question. I apologize. Why 6 months for the conditional use permit? I've seen different date ranges before in our cups in the past. Why was this one decided to be 6 months?
I'm wondering where you see that.
I think it was written for 6 months, although Director Tassini did indicate that 3 months may be more appropriate in this case.
Oh,
We
this is
have
for the code
discretion.
enforcement is what you're talking about, or for the
Just
duration?
review,
I
I
thought
think.
the actual duration of the cup was 6 months.
Oh,
and then
no.
come back to be back. No,
No, that's not, maybe.
it's,
Yeah, I know what you're talking
it's
about.
quite possible that somewhere in the 273 pages I read.
It was actually review. So it is written in the resolution
As a
that
review.
there's a review period. So
But
in
not
6
as
months,
a-
it would come back to us. for review.
Understood.
Normally the use permits run with the land. They
Okay.
don't have a stipulation unless we have looked at some temporary or use permits that that have to do with building a structure. And if you don't build that structure within a certain period of time, your use permit goes away. But in this instance, it's, not.
Cows
I
are
think the
there.
intent was.
Yeah,
It was the review period.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. So with that,
Oh, Thank you
I'm
so
done
much
with
for
my
your
questions.
questions. Yeah, it was very helpful. I'm going to try the difficult balancing act now, I think, that we were talking about. I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments but on all sides, because they have been very helpful to me personally in thinking through what is a difficult issue, and also difficult to come out to a meeting and speak when you know that your neighbors might have a different point of view, and that's can be very emotional and fraught. And so that takes a lot of courage. And, there's a lot of subjective experience and opinion involved just by the very nature of this particular request. So I don't discount anyone's experience or observation. But I go to the findings that we're asked to make. And kind of what I see is sort of I have to sort of distinguishing between what's argument and, maybe allegation in some cases, an argument versus what I see as sort of more of the evidence. In looking at, and I do think that agency, there was one speaker who spoke about giving, weight and credence to an agency opinion or an expert opinion. And that for me does have meaning. So when I think about, in this case, the water board, and I do have the benefit of working with the water board on projects that I work on. So these are very experienced people who care very much about the quality of the waters of the bay. It gives me comfort to know that someone who has expertise in reviewing these types of plans has been out to the property, has weighed in and helped craft a plan, and that the water board has looked at the plan, has not raised any significant issues, environmental issues. And I think we could argue until the cows come home about our personal opinions about water quality and what is causing, drainage issues. I think that's I do have a certain, I am looking to what the experts and the evidence is telling me, and I'm not seeing any evidence in the record before us that the cows are causing public health or environmental issues. I also I'm one thing that stands out to me is that when we were last here, we heard a lot about noise and the smell. We actually didn't hear about many of the issues that we're hearing tonight. And so that tells me that maybe noise and smell are not such an issue anymore. And maybe as time has gone by and the cows have settled, when I was out there, another thing that I'm relying on is my own personal experience. I visited the site. I didn't hear anything. I did hear construction work happening down in Paradise Cave for the entire time I was there. But I didn't hear the cows and I didn't smell the cows. And I walked all throughout the property and I was there for, close to 2 hours, I think. And I've gone down into the community several times to walk around to just experience it. So my personal experience and observation is also a factor for me tonight. But back to the findings that we're asked to make. Based on the record before us, I do believe that I can make the findings that are required, certainly for the 2 cows. And I would be curious to hear from my fellow commissioners on the 4 cows, because I would be inclined to add some additional conditions. And those conditions would be a 3-month review rather than the 6-month, which I think is what the director has recommended in this case. Some self-reporting protocol, and that may be something currently I'd be inclined to kind of send this back for a new resolution before us. So there can be some thinking around what it doesn't have to be complex or highly involved self-reporting, but something that indicates to us that the management plan is being followed. I would say unscheduled or unannounced visits, or allowing staff to go onto the property in an unannounced fashion to see what's happening out there. And then having Mr. Lewis come back out and review the vegetation, just check in maybe in 3 months, or maybe it's connected to the 3-month review period. Also, I wonder if there could be some requirement that if information comes in from other agencies like BCDC or CDFW, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, if Mr. Crandall, the landowner, there could be something that within a certain time period of learning of information that may, I'm not saying it will, but that may impact our rationale, our thinking, that Mr. Crandall would notify the town of new information that is relevant.
So just to be clear, would that be part of the 3-month, or that's just in general?
It's just in general. My thinking right now as I'm, is just in general, if there's new, and I'm thinking in particular about BCDC, if there is an administrative hearing, it sounds like that's a different issue, but maybe there's conversation with BCDC staff or something new comes in within a certain period of learning new information that may be relevant to the environmental impacts of the cows, that staff would be notified. And then that we'd have an opportunity at the 3-month review to discuss any new information that was relevant. And so that's kind of, I would add those conditions to give us that a tighter, to build in some enforcement measures that are manageable, that aren't too onerous. And that's not an invitation necessarily for people to just complain every day. I think, it's always important for us to respect one another and respect staff and really, if there are substantive or real issues, to bring those forward, because we do rely on the community to indicate when something's not working. So those would be my proposals. And then just in terms of the findings, just some specific points, as I look at, agree with staff's analysis in most instances, particularly with the finding, the second finding about the compatibility of design and location and operating characteristics with the existing and future land uses. I think one thing that I think many of us like about Paradise Drive is it is rural in character. And I've heard from community members in the context of the land use designations that they're wanting to maintain that rural character. I think this is one, this is doing that to, and that there, you know, the public health, it's hard to weigh impacts to individuals and homeowners. We've heard both sides of that issue. I haven't seen any evidence that there are public health impacts. Certainly there are some impacts to people personally, but I've also heard that there are lots of really beneficial community impacts to families and children. And so that is, you know, in weighing all of these things, I'm coming down on the side of let's give this a try. And check back in 3 months and see how it's working. Conditional use permits can always be, you know, they can be changed. They can be, you know, it's not forever. So
Yes,
those are
and-
my
and
thoughts.
they can be revoked.
They can be revoked. So those are my kind of initial thoughts. And I guess the only thing is, should we start with 2 cows and see how that in 3 months, how the enforcement measures, how the self-reporting is working, how the vegetation, you know, I don't have a personal opinion on the difference between 2 or 4.
Well, I do have an opinion on the difference between 2 and 4. I don't think,
Yes.
I think 4 makes almost no difference.
Okay.
I really don't believe that adding 2 cows to the situation is going to make any difference. And while I agree that we should listen carefully and have some sort of mechanism in place, that we are listening to the neighbors and taking the feedback that is coming in, particularly if the gentleman who spoke to us wants to get a water test, I think we absolutely need to carefully weigh what kind of information comes to us. I don't believe that anything else significant needs to be altered in the CUP. I agree that the staff did a very nice job at addressing each of the elements that we are responsible to address. The compatibility, design, location, size, and operating characteristics with the existing and future land uses in the vicinity is also the criteria that popped out at me the most, particularly because we're at this crossroads of, you know, whether there would be cows here or high density housing. The neighborhood has expressed in previous neighborhood design plans that they would prefer that it would stay more natural and rural. So I think that under the current information of what the neighborhood has expressed, the majority of the neighborhood, that this is more in line with the compatibility of the characteristics of what they might want of the future land uses in the vicinity. And we also very well know that there were a lot of objectors to having high density residential there instead. So compatibility is an interesting criteria on here. I think it actually does satisfy the compatibility element. And most of the other, Dina went over these earlier during her presentation. They're pretty self-explanatory, pretty obvious qualifications that are satisfied. These are the ones that the Planning Commission considers regularly. Nothing jumped out at me as a problem. We do have enough information to satisfy each of these from the experts and from the town's diligent work on this issue. So I would be inclined to approve the CUP in the state that it is in. There is already a review built in. We
6
would, 180 days from the date of final approval, we would review the permit in a public hearing. I think that's fine. I think this is our second meeting on this issue, and I think we've been through the details, and the applicant has been extremely diligent about providing everything we asked for. I think we should approve it in the state that it's in.
So what is your thinking, Commissioner Woodward?
Well, I think we're going to have a unanimous vote here. I will just say, this is a very difficult situation, knowing how many neighbors are, you know, certainly feel impacted by this, and you know, perception becomes reality to people. This is almost like a children's parable in the sense of like, be careful what you wish for. I do think Mr. Crandall has been certainly in his mind, and it sounds like in the mind of many neighbors, a very good neighbor. He's done a number of things. You know, our own fire department has commended him for the clearing of the land. I certainly don't think he was doing it with the thought toward, you know, is this going to cause significant erosion? And it sounds like from the other neighbor, you know, they left the tree stumps in and have kind of done a lot of those things where it feels like to me that when you look to the compatibility of the design and the relationship to the location and some of the things that we're asked to test, that they are really actually making this a better piece of property for their neighbors and obviously for their family and themselves. I am compelled by the size of the lot in particular and where the cows sit today. I do, if I have any concerns around the plan, it's probably on, you know, the grazing areas 3 and 4. But, you know, we, as referenced numerous times, we have a 6-month review period. And if it seems like that's not working out or we're getting complaints or we can certainly revisit that. But otherwise, I feel like the staff has done a tremendous job in an extremely complex situation and, you know, kind of summarizing this for us. So I'm aligned with approving it as written tonight without having modifications and putting this to bed, if you will.
Well, that I absolutely respect the feelings of my fellow commissioners, and I do. I floated a few proposals. I think it also, knowing that staff has been thinking through how to manage this going forward. I think some of these things can be done just at the staff level, not necessarily built into the resolution. You know, I think a 3-month review would be great. I think it's not a new issue for us, and I'm comfortable with a 6-month review this evening. I would feel comfortable moving forward.
All right, well, I'm going to move, we approve the resolution in the state that we have in front of us.
I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the meeting is adjourned.